Now here we have an episode that I didn't have to rewatch before doing the review of it. Avatar: The Last Airbender, The Storm, is, to spoil the rest of this video, absolutely phenomenal. It's not only, in my opinion anyway, one of the best episodes of this franchise. I won't even just say this show, but like the entire franchise. It's one of the best animated episodes of anything that I've ever seen in my life. Not just because the animation is nice, like it is. The animation in this is nice. There's probably nicer animation in more modern stuff, but the animation in this still looks good. There's some fantastic nature shots, for lack of a better term, and there's flashback sequences that have their own color grading and stuff that look really, really good. But even if this didn't look nice, even without good animation, this would still be a fantastic episode of television because the way it handles its story. What I think is great about this is that Avatar is... I've said this about like Star Trek Deep Space Nine as well. There was an era of shows that were still like episodic, weekly, aired on television. Maybe we can syndicate these two kinds of shows that still technically had serialization. They had overarching stories. Avatar is one of those shows, and it's one of the better ones, especially for kids. It has overarching narrative elements that are connected together, and yet each episode is still distinct and watchable on its own. And in keeping with that, this episode, while it does tie directly into the arcs of Aang and Zuko, two of our most major protagonists, it could still work as a self-contained story as well. It banks on us understanding that Zuko wants to capture Aang, but it tells us that. It reminds us of that, and it does so in very visceral ways. And it banks on us understanding how important the Avatar is to the world, and why he is important right now. But it tells us that very succinctly, too, by not only giving us Aang's backstory of when he learned that he was the Avatar and implying things through that, but reminding us of the Fire Nation's evil bad guy war that's ongoing. Like, that's a major part of the story, as it's part of Zuko's backstory. And his backstory is covered here, too. Not only that, but it solidifies the parallel between those two characters. If prior to this episode, you were having trouble understanding that Zuko, while he is an antagonistic force in the story, is also a protagonist of the story, like, I don't know how the show could get more obvious about that than this, aside from, like, cutting to live action of the showrunners turning to the camera and saying Zuko's not actually the bad guy. But it creates those parallels in subtle enough ways that you don't immediately pick up on what's happening. It feels natural, like a natural evolution of the A and B plots of this story as they're being introduced. And it handles that by keeping those A and B plots actually very simple for such a complex episode that builds the lore of the show through building the backstories of the characters. As much as this one does, this has such a simple story to it. A storm is coming. And some characters recognize that, like not a metaphorical storm, a literal storm. Some of the characters recognize that, other characters don't. It leads to conflict. It opens on Aang having a nightmare of by the end of the episode, we know, storm that ended up stranding him under the water where Sokka and Katara found him, with all kinds of symbolism in it of like how he feels the weight of losing everybody he cares about and how he's worried that it'll happen again, as well as how he feels the weight of his responsibilities upon him all the time, as well as the weight of some guilt from his past that we learn about in this episode. But even though he is clearly perturbed by this nightmare, and even though his friends can tell, he doesn't want to worry them, seemingly, so he doesn't tell them what's going on. They go into town to get food, realize they don't have any money, so Sokka gets a job on a fishing boat for the day to make some cash for them to buy the supplies that they need to go on. Meanwhile, on Zuko's ship, Iroh points out that the storm is coming, suggests that maybe they should take precautions, but Zuko insists that they continue on course so that he can find the Avatar as fast as possible, and ends up belittling his crew in the process. Like, he gets right up in one crew member's face and basically tells the guy that his life is less important to Zuko than capturing the Avatar. Like, there's more to it than that. He says capturing the Avatar is more important than any one person's life, which would include himself, but, I mean, that's not what you're going to hear if you're part of this grumpy, angry, seemingly spoiled prince's crew, where he keeps putting you in danger, right? And this ends up devolving into that same crew member telling Zuko off later, to the point that Iroh has to break up an Agni-Kai between the two of them. Meanwhile, the captain of the fishing ship that Sokka is going to go out to sea with recognizes Aang as the Avatar and tells him off for being gone for 100 years, leading to Aang to break down and have to run off and be by himself. Because, as we learn throughout the course of the episode, he feels that guilt. He feels the weight of the guilt of that every day, not just because he wasn't there, but because he genuinely believes it's his fault that he wasn't. And Katara does find him hidden away in a cave to be with him, to try to do something for him just after the storm has hit, creating this beautiful, epic backdrop for both of these characters' backstories to come out, because while this is happening, Iroh goes to sit with the crew, hoping to explain to them why Zuko is the person that he is. And we get their backstories, that Aang learned that he was the Avatar sooner than he was supposed to, sooner than the Avatar typically does, because people, specifically the Air Nomads in this case, were already seeing indicators of the coming war and wanted to be prepared for it. And when his friend Gyatso insisted that he continue to grow up like a normal child as much as possible, in contrast to the other members of the Council of Old Windbags, who wanted him to train hardcore to be the Avatar, right now, they threatened to take him away from Gyatso, to not allow Gyatso to be his guardian anymore, and even send him off to a different temple to learn. Between this and his friends treating him differently now that it's out public that he's the Avatar, he ran, got caught in a storm that pushed him underwater, and while he did go into the Avatar state, using its power to save himself and Appa, that's what trapped him under the water in that icy sphere. And so while I'm sure the weight of his responsibilities definitely contributed to what happened, it was mainly his fear and his anxiety over the threat of losing everyone he cared about all at once that caused him to attempt to escape the situation, leaving the world without the Avatar for 100 years. And so he sees it as he was selfish, and now the world is in ruin. And I don't blame him for that. I'd probably feel much the same way. Meanwhile, we learn about Zuko's backstory, that he wanted to be a bigger part of his father's war effort, so insisted that he sit in on a war meeting, but when the general in charge of the meeting gave his plan to send a battalion of fresh recruits with no experience to act as a sacrificial diversion for other troops to get the job done, he spoke out. These are loyal Fire Nation soldiers who just want to serve. They don't deserve that kind of treatment. But in doing so, he insulted the general, but because it was the Fire Lord's war meeting, he by extension insulted his father, the Fire Lord, and so his father challenges him to an Agni Kai that Zuko won't fight, and to teach him respect, the Fire Lord gives him the burn scar that's on his face now. And what's particularly cool is that even in this flashback, Iroh is already trying to look out for Zuko, likely because he sees that Zuko is a good person and wouldn't do well in one of these meetings. He tries to dissuade him from going, and then he tries to keep him from doing the exact thing that he did. So even back then, they had much the same dynamic, where Zuko doesn't really listen to Iroh when Iroh is just trying to do what's best for him. And in the end, the episode ends with Aang going out into the storm to try to find the fishermen and Sokka, who are both in mortal danger. And he's pushed underwater again by the storm. And again, he calls on the Avatar state, but this time, he's able to use it to get himself up out of the water. And I have to question, like, it's never confirmed one way or the other, but I have to question, would he have just gotten trapped in there again? I get that this isn't like the frozen waters of one of the poles at this point anymore, but isn't it possible that he would have gotten trapped down there again, just protected by the Avatar state again, if not for the experience that he had from the first time this happened? Isn't it possible that being trapped in the Avatar state that first time helped prepare him to save lives here? And like, this isn't exactly the conclusion that Aang comes to, but he does come to the conclusion that he can't do anything to change the past. All he can do at this point is move forward and try to do the best he can, which is the best way to look at his situation, just objectively. But to really hammer home the fact that both of these characters, both Aang and Zuko, are protagonists in the show, when Aang emerges from the water with the people that he went out there to save, he flies right over Zuko's ship. But Zuko isn't able to pursue him because he made the mistake of sailing into that storm, and now he has to protect himself and his crew from his own decision. And God, the parallels here. Like I noted some of them down, but I don't even know. I'll try to go through all of them off of memory. I don't even know if I'll be able to remember literally all of them. There's so many. Like the fact that Iroh is able to recognize that the storm is coming, and Zuko doesn't believe him. It's a direct parallel to the fact that the old fisherman's wife can recognize that the storm is coming, but he doesn't believe her. Aang getting told off for missing that 100 years by the fisherman is a direct parallel to Zuko being told off by one of his crew members. Obviously, the storytelling scenes are parallels, but there's a good contrast there too, with Aang telling his own story to one of the people who cares about him, whereas Zuko, his story is being told by arguably the only person who cares about him, to a group of people that person feels might come to care about him if they knew the kind of person he actually was. Then there's the fact that Zuko, in his story, was harmed because he was trying to stand up for others, whereas Aang ended up harming himself because he was, at least arguably, being selfish. Aang survived unscathed, but the people around him were harmed, whereas Zuko was harmed, but no one around him immediately was. Aang ends up taking something positive from the situation, whereas Zuko has only become more and more negative. And in the end, even though Zuko's crew comes to understand him better and actually care about his mission, he's not able to pursue the Avatar in this specific instance because he was selfish and pressed on when he shouldn't have, putting them in danger, whereas Aang is able to overcome one of his greatest weaknesses to go out into that storm selflessly and save lives. Even the decisions that were made for them in their backstories that led directly to where they are now, Zuko being burned by his father and Aang being reassigned to a different temple, are a direct contrast to one another. People were trying to use Aang to turn him into something he wasn't ready to be, leading him to run off, whereas Zuko's father, while he's a bad person and his motives were definitely wrong, there's no indication that he did this just to punish his son. It really does seem like he genuinely wanted Zuko to learn what he considers proper respect, that he did what he did to Zuko and then gave him this impossible task to recover the Avatar, because he does in some twisted way think that that's what's best for Zuko himself. I can't. Like, I get when you're the writer on a show and you're creating the world from more or less scratch, you get to decide what happens in your world. That you can control every single stage of what happens, and some of these parallels are just so perfect that they seem obvious in retrospect. But this story is so well crafted, it tricks you into thinking that it's a simpler story than it actually is. That it would have been simpler to put this together than it actually was. It's a masterpiece. And it changes the way you look at these characters. Prior to this, we got inklings that Aang felt guilty about something. Now we know what it was, and we can judge him accordingly. And prior to this, we got inklings of the fact that Zuko isn't as bad as the people around him, that he's not a bad guy. And now we know that that's true. I don't know what else to say about this one. I'm kind of rambling at this point a bit. But, like, man, it's just so good. It's hard not to want to just keep talking about it, you know? Like, it's such a good episode. Like, this is the one episode of this entire show, and it's weird for me to say that, because this is before Toph even comes into the story. This is the one episode of this show that I will say to people, if you're not sure about this show, go watch The Storm. Because, yeah, it spoils a couple of things, but it's just such a perfect microcosm of everything that's great about Avatar. I can't recommend it highly enough. And to be clear, while I said at the beginning of the review that I didn't need to rewatch this episode to do the review, I still did, and it still holds up. Like, I was kind of half worried. I'm like, this can't be as good as I remembered it. But it is. As per usual, though, guys, if you have seen the Avatar episode, The Storm, what do you think of it? Let's get a discussion about how frickin' amazing it is going in the comments section down below. And while you're down there, you might as well like the video, share it with anyone else who you think would enjoy my content, subscribe if you haven't. You can also check out links to my various social medias, as well as the many ways you could help out the channel. Those will be in the video description. And I was supposed to, like, officially announce it in this video, but it's taking longer to put together than I thought. I'm creating a new channel. I want to start doing more narration stuff, more voiceover stuff. And I had the inkling to combine it with reaction content. Not like straight up reaction content, but like response content, right? I'm not sure if it's a mix that's going to work out. I might end up having to just do one or the other. I might end up having to split it between different things. But a new channel is coming. I'll announce it properly soon. Just keep an eye out for it in case you want to check that out. In the meantime, though, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.